Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Grand Traverse and to our service today with guest minister Reverend Lucy Wechter-Webb. Reverend Lucy is an ordained Presbyterian minister and has worked in many capacities with the disenfranchised. Reverend Lucy is also on the core team of the SALT Coalition, which is a local coalition, spiritual activists leading together, doing work on social justice issues and getting out the vote. So you can see that there's a considerable overlap with UUers. She is well qualified to speak today on the topic of the stories we need, storytelling for liberation. I am Susan Smith, the coordinator of this service and a member of the Sunday Services Committee. We're glad to have you with us, whether in person or streaming from home. On the back of that skeletal order of service that you have, you will note our land acknowledgement, a request to silence electronic devices, and a notice about the book at the front of our sanctuary in which you can record your joys and concerns and or light a candle of commemoration as you prefer. Margaret Wozniak, a member of the Congregational Care Team, will read what you choose to share a little later in this service. It is impossible for me to enter further into the content of today's service without acknowledging the seismic, landmark decisions of the Supreme Court in the recent past. Those earth-shattering decisions include immunizing presidents against illegal acts during their presidency, criminalizing the condition of being homeless and sleeping on public land, replacing the technical expertise of scientists with the judgment of Supreme Court jurists in the Chevron case, allowing blatant racial discrimination in drawing voting maps and wresting control of women's reproductive decisions from them. I found that this Sunday I had to acknowledge the elephant in the room, so I named our laments, the freedoms and rights that have been wrested from us, the tyranny that has been foisted upon us. Now, dear ones, it is incumbent upon us to do what is necessary to get those flags flying right side up again. Somehow, some way, I have faith that we will. Here at UUCGT, we are a welcoming congregation and are different from one another in many ways, in religious backgrounds and beliefs, in gender identity and sexual orientations, and in the structure of our families. Accordingly, we embrace your diversity. We welcome you just as you are to our beloved community. If you are new to our congregation or haven't been here for a while and are willing and able, you may stand to introduce yourself. Someone will bring a microphone which will enable even those at home streaming to hear your introduction. However, please feel free to remain seated and silent if you prefer. Is there anyone who would like to introduce themselves today? Good.
Hi, everyone. It is good to be together. I am Marin, my partner Luke, our children Ezra and August. We are members of UUAA in Ann Arbor, although we haven't been there for a while. We're up here for this summer visiting Luke's parents. We're so happy to be here. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for being here. Anybody else? Not me. There's a guy who speaks his mind. All right. For our social hour following services, we have designated yellow mugs for those who we haven't met previously or seen lately. This will allow us to identify you as a visitor or not so frequent member and welcome you personally. Now, this summer, we are operating with a skeleton crew. We lack an office administrator as well as our own minister for much of the summer, and a decision was made to keep our order of service simple and in outline form. The one available online is, that last I saw it at least, was not accurate, so don't rely on that. Our order of service doesn't contain the specifics usually seen in the order of service, such as the name of the musical pieces. So I will name them at the time of their presentation. For now, I request that we turn our attention to our centering music, Recycled Love, composed and performed by Amanda Mangiardi.
It is our custom to join UU congregations worldwide to light the symbol of our congregational teams and our congregational worship. And Susan is going to light the chalice today. May this light of Unitarian Universalism be our daily guide. May we follow it as we interact with others, knowing that its love is constant and unfailing. May its light lead us in this service on liberation. And now I invite you to follow the sound of the singing bowl as we bring our full attention to this time together.
We will, excuse me, we will now join in singing, Rise If You're Willing and Able, our opening hymn, number 17, in the gray hymnal, and a few individuals from the vocal ensemble will lead us in our song. Thank you. Now is the time of our offering when you so generously give to support the congregation and community needs in the Traverse City area. Please note that your checks may be earmarked on the memo line as to whether they are to count toward your pledge and the needs of the congregation or for community needs. If you're watching at home, you may give as described in the slides via the Vanco Giving app, the UUCGT website, by check, or my favorite, by pre-arrangement with your bank for a monthly withdrawal automatically deposited in the UUCGT account. However you give, you may always designate your gift as you choose for the congregation or for community needs. Let us now enjoy the meditation music, Life Rhythms 2, composed and played by Amanda Mangiardi during the collection of our offering.
In this community, we care about each other. We are bold enough to ask for help when we need it, and we are grateful enough to acknowledge the gifts that bless us. I'm here today as a member of the Congregational Care Team, and Susan asked me to share today's joys and concerns. As always, if your joy or concern is too heavy to share at the moment, know that we have made space in our hearts, and we hold it with you. If you wish to share a joy or concern privately, I will be available and glad to talk with you after the service. As my longtime friend, Marjorie Anderson, whom I grew up with, said, as her husband did so many things for her as she lived with cancer, life was meant to be lived in twos. No one is meant to travel life's journey alone. So this is what has been shared with us this morning. It's an anonymous note saying, for my brother-in-law, Jim. And Doug and I would like to add, our next door neighbor was hit by a third-time drunk driver offender 2 weeks ago, and she is terribly injured. So for Barb, I ask you to hold her in your hearts for the coming days, as she needs all kinds of rehabilitative therapy. So let us hold these for a moment in our hearts in a moment of silence. For Jim and Barb and all others.
Good morning. Listen now for the first reading. This is a reading from what I like to call the Jesus movement, otherwise known as the Christian scriptures of the New Testament. And it is a reading from Luke chapter 5. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins, or else the new wine will burst the wineskins and be spilled, and the wineskins will be ruined. But new wine must be put into new wineskins, and both are preserved. And no one, having drunk old wine, immediately desires new, for he says the old is better. Luke 5:37 through 39. I invite you into a spirit of prayer with me this morning as we enter more deeply into wisdom that is of our world and of our bodies and of spirit. And to pray is to speak and be with our longings, and to be with the longings of our hearts and the longings of the world. And so whatever posture of prayer you may take, I invite you to join me in that this morning. Generous Spirit of life, we gather in your midst. And we gather in the company of each other, of each other's hearts, each other's histories, each other's stories. And we gather together both with one another and with you for the sake of feeling for our way forward. To feel connected and buoyed by the wisdom of each other and the wisdom of your Spirit. To feel held, to feel loved, to feel belonging. And we give thanks for the possibility of such things in our life. We gather this morning with weary hearts, with worry, perhaps with trepidation about what remains in 2024, perhaps with fear about the years that are beyond that. And we also gather with glimmers of hope and possibility, We gather with the questions of what we don't yet know, but are longing to discover for the sake of our collective liberation and the longings of all our hearts. We lift up these prayers, these deep desires, and our petitions for justice and for healing for all of us and for ourselves. Amen. The second reading, we're going to sing, is that right? I'm still learning your order of service. I believe we're going to have the song responsive number 123, Spirit of Life. The second reading this morning is from a modern text that came out just a couple of years ago called Hospicing Modernity by Vanessa Machado de Oliveira. And I'm going to read a short excerpt from this book as our main text to be with this morning. She writes, "We are living off of expired or expiring stories. Stories that expire can no longer dance with you. They are lethargic or stuck. They can't move things in generative ways anymore. But we often feel we cannot let go of them. Many of these expired stories give us a sense of security, purpose, and direction, precisely because they seem stable and solid. If we notice they are dying, we refuse to accept it, and we put them on life support because we fear the void left in their place when they are no longer there. We don't realize that when stories expire, their vitality is already gone. And if their vitality is gone, we are also stuck. Because our vitality comes partly from stories, moving things in the world and within us. If we want to get unstuck, we need to put these expired stories to rest." Again, that's an excerpt from Hospicing Modernity by the Brazilian scholar Vanessa Machado de Oliveira. It is good to be with you this morning. I've been sort of circling the UU realm over the last 5 years. I moved home to Michigan 5 years ago, and of course the pandemic began, and had come to visit prior to that first shutdown, and then have been kind of in orbit with you around various justice issues here locally, including the SALT Coalition and some Palestinian liberation work that Holly has been leading among you, and pride events and many other things. So it's good to be with you this morning and feel you in this formation again. Thanks for having me. I want to be in this question about stories today with you. If you were to tell a story of your family, how would it start? Would it start with your parents' childhood? Would it start in the United States or in some other land? Would it start with the eldest ancestor that you could name, or perhaps even farther back? What would it include? Would there be stories of hardship or triumph? Would it include details about the world that surrounded your family? Would there be stories of shame or forgiveness? Would there be stories of the conditions of the time that impacted the choices your people had to make? Would there be heroes, villains? Would there be complex characters? I can already feel this well-honed muscle working in me as I speak these questions that pushes me to ask, but what's the right way to do it? And I have found a different question more useful lately. So I bring that to you this morning. It is this: what is the story that you need to tell for the sake of the generations to come? What is the story you need to tell for the sake of the generations to come? I've been living with this question since I returned from Wales, where I took an ancestral trip with my mom and my sister this May. And I've been in this question: what is the story of my family? How has it been told to me? How has it been not told to me? And how do I practice telling the story of my family in such a way that it moves us, meaning it moves me, it moves my family, it moves my children, it moves the people whom I share that story with? How do I tell that story in such a way that it moves us toward our longing and our vision for the world, toward healing and justice? How do I tell that story? Let me start with a few of the stories that first shaped me as a child about my family. Perhaps you can relate. Many were very traditional stories that align with the American dream. For example, my grandfather, Pappy Jack, he quit school in the 8th grade after the family lost the farm in the Depression in Kansas. And he became an iron worker, and he and his older brother supported the family of 10 children with their young labor. And we, his descendants, were successful in part because of his hard work and his sacrifice. His son went on to become the first PhD graduate in the family, my father. And it's a bootstrap story. And I learned that I was to be grateful for the sacrifice of my grandfather. Indeed, I am. And I learned that this kind of success is available in America if you work hard for it. My family was living proof. Except, of course, that kind of success and access isn't available to everyone in America. There were other stories in my childhood about the entrepreneurial spirit of the Apples, my mother's line, for whom I'm named after, Lucy Apple Wachter Webb. My great-great-grandfather, his son, and his daughter, my mother, all pursued the American dream of starting your own business. The first three were in real estate, and my mom was the one to stray from the nature of the business. But all were buoyed by this story that in America you could build anything. You could live wherever you wanted. You could fulfill your dreams. And with that story came a sense of entitlement, that I could move and live anywhere that I wanted. And in fact, I moved all over the country for the first 20 years of my adulthood. I lived in Memphis and Atlanta and Boston and Columbus, and I traveled across the country farming. The world was my oyster. Except, of course, it's not. And to live this way is to live in a colonial mindset, that I can live by the story that tells me any land could be my land, to claim as my own, to thrive upon. This story, of course, has led to deadly consequences in our shared history, no? I have to say that these were a couple of the trails of stories that I sort of clung to as a child. But the real truth is that the stories of my family also included a lot of lack. In other words, there was no story. There was a vacuum of story that lacked any kind of contours of deeper roots or longevity or heritage. There was a lot of disconnection to what came before, even just a few generations ago. There were no stories of the languages my people spoke before English. There were no stories about when or why or who came to live upon this land, Turtle Island, that we call the United States. There were no stories of what traditional foods were eaten and shared among generations. The primary stories told were future-oriented, how my family had reached forward, bigger, better. And the unspoken story behind the vacuum of story is that the past didn't matter. It was either too painful or too inconsequential to talk about. Now, perhaps you can feel like a little bit of thickness in my disdain about this. I know I'm not alone in this experience. This is a common American experience, in fact. But my emotion is here. This disdain I feel rising is here because there's real grief and some anger, actually, about what my lineage chose to leave behind, what they cut themselves off from. Telling stories in that way shaped me over time, in ways that were not always helpful and in ways that reinforced a legacy of harm in the broader world. Vanessa Mercado de Oliveira writes about how story moves and shapes us. And as a Brazilian scholar, she draws upon the work of other indigenous scholars who have helped us to understand the difference between what they call wording the world versus worlding the world. Wording the world is the idea that stories index the world. They seek to contain or enclose or define with a fixed reality the categories of things. Whereas worlding the world, stories visit us. They move the world. They shape and influence and teach and interact with us. They're dynamic. It's a more indigenous way of understanding story. And so the distinction here is stories can categorize us or they can stir us, right? They can dominate, or they can inspire and agitate us. And practicing story in this second way, the worlding the world way, helps to shift our questions from, is this story true? To, what is this story trying to move? Can I be curious about what this story is trying to move in me or in us? Instead of asking, what does this story mean? Like I have to get to the fixed moral of the story, I get down to the bottom of it. Worlding the world invites us to ask, what does this story do over time? How does it impact us? How does it invite us into relationship with the land around us? How does it move us toward practicing more consent or accountability? How does this story interact or dance with us, as she writes? Oliveira also says, if the story is retold several times, its power to land in our bodies and move things actually expands. And so think about that for a moment. How many times have you retold a story of your family? How many times has the story of your family been retold to you? And what has the impact of that story been? How has the story of your family landed in your body, in your family's bodies? And what has it moved or shaped in you? Our stories become embodied in us, and we're deeply moved and impacted by them, which includes our family stories, but also the stories of our spiritual traditions, the stories of our neighborhoods, the stories of our communities, the stories of our nation. Which means there's a huge cost to us, then, if we're living, as she writes, off of expired stories or expiring stories. I experience this to be true when I feel for my own family's stories. They are stories that need to be composted, actually. They're stories that have expired. They were stories that indeed helped my ancestors to survive some tough times. And at the same time, they were stories that were never accessible in this country for all people to be moved by or to dance with. The way that these stories shaped me was indeed to follow my dreams, but without recognizing the cost of my actions. They were stories that had me stuck. They had lost their vitality. I was stuck in reinforcing colonialism and the entitlement that comes with whiteness, even though they were also stories that inspired a real sense of dignity in my own work and the commitment of my family. And so as I began to feel for how do I tell the stories of my people, how do I then tell the story of my family, I'm discovering that I'm running into a couple of pitfalls, and I want to share them with you for the sake of our collective learning. The first is that I can get stuck in a story that I'm a part of a lineage of harm. Like, that's it. My people are the ones who take, who dominate, who are rootless, who are cultureless. That's my people. They're the people who brought harm upon this land, upon its inhabitants, and that is their only lineage. Can you feel how that's a stuck story? How does that shape us to tell that story? I can also get stuck in a story of victimhood if I'm not careful. My people lost so much when they came home, when they left their home and they left behind their cultural identities to come to America. And then they lost the farm, and then there's all this story of loss. My people left their homeland, they left their language, they left their ritual practices for grief. We are the victims here. And in fact, all of those things are true at once, yeah? My people left home and lost a lot, and my people also took and dominated. And I and my children and the generations to come need stories that will hold the complexities of all of that. This really landed in my body when I was standing at the shoreline in Wales, which I don't know if there is a picture or not. They asked me to send a picture. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. Either way, I was standing at the shoreline in Wales.
I have it on a slide with other stuff, not by itself.
Great, that's great. You'll see it later. And I was standing at the beach, and it was my first time really greeting the sea and the land upon which, upon arriving. There it is. And as I stood there and I introduced myself to the land and the water, I was filled up with this overwhelming sense of reassurance and gratitude that, oh, my people also get to come from an ancient bond to land and to beauty. I've known that this land wasn't my people's land, but here I can actually feel, oh, this is the ancient bond to black rock and to hills, to magpies and to lambs, to seaweed bread and open mossy forest and tidal rivers and blue stone. I had an experience of reclaiming a story that my people were also deeply tied to a particular patch of land. It was a story of beauty and resilience and a story of belonging to place in a way that I've never experienced before, actually. And I could feel the blessings of my people more vibrantly as I felt for the vibrancy of the land. At the same time, I moved through that land for a couple of weeks, knowing that my people chose to leave it behind, and that their leave-taking came at a great cost. Their migration made them participants in land theft and genocide. Their choice to leave their cultural ways behind made them complicit in building up a world that valued white bodies above all other bodies. And the severance from their homeland also brought a great grief and rootlessness to their descendants. And so as I returned home, I began reckoning with what are the stories? What are the stories that I need to tell my children? How do I hold the complexities of the beauty and the trauma of my people? How do I hold the impact of the choices of my people on the people of the land where I now live? How do I tell stories that invite the shame and the violence into the light and also share about the resiliency and the buoyancy of my people? And how do we excavate stories in our lineages that include forgiveness and repair and resistance for the sake of moving and shaping the next generation? Can our stories be wide enough even to reveal and inspire what we can't yet even see ourselves? These questions also dance with us in this season of the 4th of July. It is a time when we tell many collective stories about what is America and who is America. Stories about independence, the cost of freedom, stories about how we came to be as a nation, stories about our benevolence around the world as a nation, stories that we are the leaders of the free world. These sound familiar? Am I tracking? Yeah? Do I live in the same place as you? Okay, good. What parts of our nation's story gets told when we tell those stories? Who or what gets left out? And how do those stories, perhaps the most important question, how do those stories move us? How do they shape us? Can we care a little bit less about, is the story true, or what is the fixed meaning of that story, and instead ask, what do they do in us? What do those stories do in us? As I was preparing to speak today, I heard a story on NPR about President Biden visiting France for the 80th anniversary of D-Day. And he was quoted as saying, speaking a particular story. He said, "Our safety depends on the safety of our friends and our allies around the world." It's a very familiar story that speaks of a lesson we supposedly learned in the wake of World War II, that we cannot isolate, that we must stand with those who share our values. It's not a bad story, really, not terrible. But from my listening, this story is so close and yet so very far from the story that we need to shape us toward a more liberated and peaceful future. What if instead of we need to stand with our allies and friends, that's what the story leaves me reaching for. Who are my friends and my allies? Who are the people like me? And then kind of like implicitly asking, like, who are the other people that I need to be fearful of? What if the story we told instead was, our safety depends on the safety of all humans and all beings around the world? What if that was the lesson we shared as we commemorate days, anniversaries like D-Day? How would that impact us today? What would it shape in us and in our choices as we navigate the present conditions? Think particularly about what's happening in Palestine right now. What would it invite as a new way of orienting to safety if we told that story? Would it support us to turn away from isolation, as we're attempting to do in the first story, but also turn us even more deeply toward interdependence, with an even more expansive understanding of what that means beyond our friends and allies? I want to leave you today with a piece of wisdom from the parables of Jesus found in the New Testament, which was the reading from Luke today. And in my own Christian spiritual lineage, this is the line that kept resurfacing for me as I was thinking about this question. And as I particularly feel for, how do we practice this? How do we actually embody the stories of the world we long for? Again, it says, "No one puts new wine into old wineskins, or else the new wine will burst the wineskins and be spilled, and the wineskins will be ruined. New wine must be put into new wineskins, and both are preserved. And no one, having drunk old wine, immediately desires the new, for he says the old is better." This parable feels for the lived experience that the scholar invites us to see today, that we don't easily let old stories die. It's hard to desire new when the old is what feels stable and safe. We must trust our allies and friends. Independence is our story on July 4th, right? How are those stories shaping us? How is it hard to let them go? How do the stories still live in us, even when we say we value interdependence? This scripture also affirms that we cannot practice a new way of being without having stories to hold us in that way of practice. If we want to practice interdependence, but we try to put it inside an old story of independence, it will burst. Yeah? If we practice telling about the grief and the resilience of our ancestral lines as it relates to colonialism on the land, but we try to have those sacred and precious stories held by this story of the American dream, it's going to burst. We need new stories, actually, to hold us in the practice of feeling for our own way forward inside of the world that we long for and the life that we long to live. In the embodied practice tradition that I practice, I'm a somatics coach. There's a tool that we use called a declaration. And we literally declare the future that we long for. And then we speak that declaration over and over again to literally organize our tissues, the tissues of our body, toward what we care about. And in my experience, this is how we feel for the vibrancy and aliveness again. What comes alive in us when we speak a story that moves us toward the thing that we long for. That might be a test for you as you try on, what's the story I need to tell? Oliveira says our vitality comes in part from the vitality of the stories. And so if we're living by expired stories, then our vitality too is becoming more and more expired. So today I leave you with the struggle of these questions that I'm in myself and invite you to be in with me. What are the stories we need to tell for the sake of the generations to come? What are the stories we need to tell for our collective liberation? May spirit and our bodies guide the way in our discernment. Amen. I invite you into a moment of stillness as we sit with what is stirring in us. Susan is passing out some lyrics, and you all were blessedly flexible this morning as I came in and said, I learned this amazing song last night. That's exactly what I'm talking about today. I'd love to teach it to you all. And so here it is. I need a copy of the lyrics, actually. Thank you. I went to a New Moon fire circle last night with some friends, and we were singing together in the practice of community singing, and one of my friends, Summer, taught me this song, which is by Three Wheels Turning, and it's called Old Stories. And I thought, well, we must close with that tomorrow after we sit with these questions together. So I'm going to invite you to feel for the rhythm and the melody with me by just singing syllables first, and then we'll weave the words in once we feel like we have the melody together. How does that sound? Yeah? All right, let me feel for it here first. I just learned this last night, so bear with me. Okay, here's the first part. Bum bum ba-dum ba-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da, ba-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da, ba-da-bum bum ba-da-ba-ba-bum. Try that with me. Bum bum ba-dum ba-da-ba-ba-bum, ba-da-da-da-dum bum 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 ba-dum bum ba-dum, ba-da-da-da-dum ba-da-dum bum ba-da-da-da-dum. Try it again. Ba-da-dum ba-dum ba-da-da-da-da, ba-da-dum bum bum, bum 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 ba-dum, ba-da-da-da-dum, ba-da-dum bum ba-da-da-da-dum. All right, we'll add those words in a minute. The chorus goes like this. together. One more time. All right, let's try it together. Here's how it goes. There's a couple of verses and then a chorus and then a couple of verses and then we'll go back to the chorus and then a final verse on the back page. You ready? These old stories, give 'em to the river, watch 'em float downstream, out to the sea. These old stories, give 'em to the river, they got no more power over me. These old stories, give 'em to the fire, watch 'em up in smoke, and away they float. These old stories, give 'em to the fire, they got no more power over me. These old stories have been running the show, record player voices that seem to think they know what's real, what's possible, what I should be. These old stories got no power over me. These old stories, give 'em to the soil, let 'em break on down to the ground. These old stories, give 'em to the soil, they got no more power over me. These old stories, give 'em to the wind, watch 'em dissipate as they blow away. These old stories, give 'em to the wind, they got no more power over me. These old stories have been running the show, record player voices that seem to think they know what's real, what's possible, what I should be. These old stories got no power over me. These old stories, give 'em to the past, that's where they were born, and now they're outworn. These old stories, give 'em to the past, they got no more power over me. These old stories running the show, record player voices that seem to think they know what's real, what's possible, what I should be. These old stories got no power over me. These old stories got no power over me. Good job. Thank you for singing with me. Thank you for experimenting with a new song. I invite Susan up to close us here.
Before Susan releases the flame, I invite you to reach out to that chalice flame and take a piece of it with you for use during the coming week. Grateful that we have this loving community to guide us on our path. Take it with.
Folks, I have a few announcements, actually more than a few, for you today. I want to emphasize that our Social Justice Action Committee is working very hard. They need the help of everyone in the congregation. We have thousands of postcards to write and address and send on their way. Some volunteers are donating postage, so there's lots of room for helpers. Please come out and help. We will also be texting voting alerts, and we'll teach this easy texting procedure to everyone. Their voting reminders were determined to be a powerful machine in getting out the vote this year, and we need everyone's help. We also ask you to share the video widely that features on our website and is of a 17-year-old who is excited to vote in her first election, and a 101-year-old man who has lived through 19 presidential administrations. The video emphasizes that it's important that everyone's voice be heard. The Social Action Justice Committee needs you, all of you, your help. Charles Brackett today is here to take pictures for our directory. For those of us who don't have them already, he will be at the far end of the social hall after service. Reverend Lucy is offering a 2-hour workshop on consent and relationships this Wednesday here at UUCGT from 6 to 8 p.m. Registration is available online at Firelight Embodiment, all one word.com. This Wednesday is the second Wednesday of the month. Second and fourth Wednesdays are potlucks starting at 5:30 p.m. So bring a dish to pass and join the group for good food and good company. And wait a minute, Chris wants to add something.
So just to clarify, the second Wednesday of this month will be here. The fourth Wednesday will be at a private home. And if you're interested in going, contact the office or respond to the potluck list, whichever you need to do. But in people's homes, its number is limited.
So get your reservation in early. All right, and also Chris has indicated that there's a second Sailor Park picnic coming up on July 20th. The potlucks is from 4 until 9, but the tables and pavilion will be reserved starting at 9 a.m. So mark your calendars and watch for more details. For social hour, immediately following our service, tables and chairs have already been set up by the Aging Gracefully groups for those who prefer to sit rather than stand. Small tables may give you a chance to sit down with someone you don't know that well and get acquainted. You may meet your new best friend at that table. Any other announcements from the group today? Anything that I've missed? All are invited to stand and join hands or outstretch hands palm out if you don't want to be touched. Benediction will be offered by Reverend Lucy. Oh, please do.
So people can hear me. In a world where we are being told stories about how it's like illegal and wrong to live outside. In a world where we're being told stories where a particular office of power can protect you from horrible choices that you've made that impact people. In a world that is telling stories about who gets to be a part of our communities depending on who you love or how you identify in your gender identity and what bathroom you might use. Don't underestimate in that world the power of your story, the power of your family's story, and the power of the stories that are driving you and you are then teaching to others. And so I invite you to go this week to be curious about your stories, to be curious about the stories that you need to tell, and to go with the blessing of the Spirit, go with the blessing of the people who surround you here today, and go with the blessing of the river and the sea and the soil and the wind and the fire, which will also help you to discern which stories need to be composted and which stories need to emerge yet anew. Go in peace.
Please join us in the social hall for refreshments and get your picture taken if it hasn't been taken yet.